New season, new camera angle, new lens. You can finally see the bar now. It feels good. And, with the advent of a new season coming, what time it is. It is fantasy rankings week. And so my entire fantasy rankings have now been made available over on the Patreon. In terms of how much they cost, I don't really care what you pay. I kind of go off of bro, hi, we just started recording. You literally never come on this table. And I record for 5 minutes. Where was I? I just kind of go off of a pay what you think is fair system. So if you want to pay $1 for the fantasy rankings, you can pay $1. You want to pay $5, $10, $1,000, please don't pay $1,000 for them. They're not worth that much. Just whatever you want to pay. They're over on the Patreon. I released the... Jesus Christ, dude, don't knock over the lights. Yeah, I released the PPR rankings first, and then the standard scoring league rankings are going to be coming out later this week. And then, if you hadn't noticed, I have a new season-long sponsor over my right shoulder there. That is Underdog Fantasy. Underdog, if you're not too familiar with them, they specialize in what's called Bestball, which, at least for me, is a little bit more preferable of an experience compared to normal fantasy leagues. You don't have to worry about getting screwed over by injuries or, random game scripts here and there. Just whoever does the best on your roster on any given week, the highest running backs, the highest receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, etc., those are the points you're going to get. You don't get penalized for guessing wrong, even when you draft the right players. And so, for me at least, it's just a lot more enjoyable because all I have to do is just draft the right players, and more often than not, I'm going to do really well. If you're interested in trying out Bestball for yourself, you can use my promo code Brett down at that link in the description below, and that promo code will get you $25 free to use on the platform. You can enter any contest you want with it in a variety of different leagues, and it just so happens that the Bestball Mania tournament, which is a $3.5 million prize pool on Underdog, it's $1 million to first place, whoever wins this Bestball tournament, biggest Bestball tournament ever. The entry fee for that is $25. So basically, if you want a free entry into that contest, if you so choose to use your money that way, you can deposit with my promo code down at the link below. And, worst case scenario, you get a free entry into a contest that might win you $1 million. So I think it's a pretty good deal, and I think it's a really entertaining fantasy format. Highly encourage you guys to check it out. And while I'm still on the topic, by the way, I do want to mention that all of the ADP values, when I'm discussing all of these undervalued wide receivers, I've got 5 really good ones that I want to talk about today. All of the ADP values that I'm using are coming from Underdog, and I'm going to be comparing those ADPs with my own rankings if you want to compare them directly. So again, just keep that in mind. And with that being said, let's get to our first undervalued wide receiver of the day, in my opinion. And this is a guy that I caused apparently quite a stir on Twitter for how much I really like him, and that is Brandon Ayuk. I think there's really no other way to say this. I think that Ayuk is going to be a bona fide superstar this season. I'm talking like legit top 5 to 7 wide receiver type production. I think he's going to be in that same conversation after this year with, the Terry McLaurins, the DeAndre Hopkinses, even the Devontae Adams of the world. I think he really is going to be seen as that superstar quality receiver. And I know that actually sounds really crazy to say. I mean, how could I possibly project a second-year receiver coming off of like a less than 800-yard season, especially with potentially a rookie quarterback this year? How could I say that he's going to be an elite producer in the league? But when you look at his film, he has every single quality and trait that you look for in a true number 1 wide receiver. He's a fantastic route runner. He has legit deep speed. In terms of yak ability, he's just utterly phenomenal and super physical with the ball in his hands. He's got a great catch radius, and even though he's not the tallest dude in the world, his arm length is actually so insane that he still has an equivalent catch radius to like a 6'4", 6'5" receiver, like the Megatrons of the world. I know that sounds crazy to say, again, I know, but he is that long and kind of lanky in his upper body that he does have that kind of crazy catch radius and really gives any quarterback that's throwing him the ball a great margin for error. And when you throw in his technical ability, his speed, his physicality, his kind of instincts as a runner, his skill set honestly looks a lot like Devontae Adams to me. And I know that I'm going to get a lot of heat for this. I certainly got a lot of heat for it on Twitter. I think after this year, we're going to look at him and Devontae Adams and see very, very similar players. Underdog, in terms of ADP on that platform right now, he's at wide receiver 23. I have him going into preseason as wide receiver 10, which means I'm already projecting him as a number 1 wide receiver fantasy-wise, and I really only see room to go up from there. I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up as like wide receiver really anywhere between like 4 and 7. And yes, I know that my comment sections are probably going to be lit up right now because you all think I'm utterly insane. But for as bad as my quarterback takes have been over the years, I do feel like I've kind of earned a little bit of leeway with wide receiver. I mean, going into Tyreek Hill's second year, where he was coming off an equally, exciting but still statistically underwhelming rookie season, I put out a film room episode comparing him to a supercharged hybrid between Steve Smith Sr. and Percy Harvin. I literally said that he was going to be a super weapon in the NFL, and he only had, I think it was like less than 600 yards as a rookie, and that's how high on him I was. Lo and behold, Patrick Mahomes starts the next year, and we finally see Tyreek's true talent show up not just on tape, but in the box score as well. A couple years after that, I had Terry McLaurin as my highest rated rookie receiver going into the 2019 season, and he didn't even have a profile picture on ESPN at the time, but I was still that confident in him. And then I think my second rated rookie receiver that year was DK Metcalf, who also ended up hitting pretty well. And then, of course, there was last year where I sat at this exact same table and was pounding it all the way for you guys to draft Justin Jefferson and Chase Claypool and just trust that their talent would win out over their situation. And at least most of you that listened and drafted Justin Jefferson a couple rounds earlier than his ADP ended up with an easy wide receiver 1 and probably won yourself a championship because of it. And by the way, yes, I am fully self-aware enough to know that all of that sounded arrogant as fuck just now, and I really don't mean to come off that way. I don't mean to, cast myself as this conceited, know-everything fantasy god. I'm really not. I lose a lot. I miss on a lot of guys. I am not perfect. But I just want to illustrate that this take of Brandon Ayuk being an elite receiver by Christmas of this year is not even really the craziest wide receiver take that I've had in the last few years. I feel like the Tyreek Hill take was even crazier than that, and it hit. I feel like my valuations of Cortland Sutton was even crazier, and that hit. And of course, Justin Jefferson and Claypool and Terry and DK, this is not that weird, at least by my standards. And so, I don't know. Take that for what you will. I feel like Brandon Ayuk has an elite skill set. He's in a great offense. He has a very good young quarterback prospect that is eventually going to be throwing him the ball. And he has a genius offensive coordinator that is going to do his damnedest to scheme him up as many opportunities as possible. I'm not saying that you guys need to, really nut up and draft Ayuk in the first round. I'm not even that crazy, even though I love this dude. But what I am saying is that if you're in the third round, middle of the third round, and you're not sure he's going to make it to your pick in the fourth, or if you're early fourth and you're not sure he's going to make it all the way to the end of the fifth, and you're trying to get cute and try to game the value and everything like that, just err on the side of he's a really good player and take him, because at worst, you're going to have a really good wide receiver, and I would rather you take him a little bit early and not have to kick yourself for missing out on him, rather than trying to wait as late as possible to get him and then miss him entirely. When in doubt, if it's the early fourth round and you're not sure what direction to go, just draft Brandon Ayuk and figure out the rest later. And that brings us to number 2 on this list, which is kind of an oldie but a goodie, but to me there's nothing wrong with playing the greatest hits, especially when the greatest hits are massively undervalued, just like with the case of Browns wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. If you want a longer version of this little spiel with a lot more detail, you can go watch my film room episode on this from last week, where I kind of broke down Odell's connection with Baker and what went wrong, and then kind of what went right towards the second half of the season with every other receiver not named Odell. It kind of gives a little deep dive into the context behind the stats and why things were a little bit more misleading than you think. But for those of you that have already seen it, you should know by now that I'm really, really high on Odell Beckham Jr. in this offense. Among all Underdog Fantasy users that are drafting on that platform, Odell is an average of wide receiver 27 off the board, so he's being drafted as a high-end wide receiver 3 right now, but I actually have him in my own wide receiver rankings that are out now on the Patreon, at least as of the time of me recording this, as wide receiver 21, so I'm a little bit higher on him, at least than most other people. We already know what Odell is as a player: phenomenal route runner, great hands, legendarily good hands, exceptional explosiveness deep down the field. He's a great yak threat. You can give him, end arounds, and he can even put up some rushing yards for you. He's everything, man. He's a complete wide receiver in every sense of the word. And honestly, the only downside to his career has always just been durability and injuries, whether it was the ankle or the ACL or the core muscle injuries, some soft tissue stuff sprinkled in here and there. He's just kind of been banged up for a really long time. And the only thing that's keeping me from ranking him even higher than this, because we know what kind of player he is when he's on the field, is that durability concern. So I'm projecting him as a wide receiver 2, kind of a mid to low level wide receiver 2 for now. But if he stays healthy, he could very easily put up wide receiver 1 numbers. I'm talking like over 1,400 yards, double-digit touchdowns. There's really nothing standing in the way of that except for his own body. So again, I fully understand why people are hesitant to draft Odell. They're worried that maybe his connection with Baker still won't be better than it was last year. I personally think it will, because he spent all offseason working with Baker, unlike last year. And I do feel like that he's going to be coming back from that ACL tear a little bit quicker than people think. Hell, he was cutting and running and sprinting after 6 months, which is freakishly fast. So again, I think he's going to be totally fine by the time we get to week 1, and I wouldn't be shocked if he's looking like his old self by the end of September. He's a great value, a phenomenal player, a Hall of Fame talent who unfortunately has just had a lot of bad stuff happen to him in his career. But I love Odell Beckham Jr., and I don't care who knows it. And if loving him as a talent is wrong, I don't want to be right. And speaking of massively talented human beings that are in very hard to figure out situations, my number 3 player on this list, Laviska Shenault Jr., is kind of an interesting case, because even though I feel like I'm higher on him than a lot of people, weirdly enough, his ADP on Underdog is kind of in lockstep with my lofty ranking of him. In terms of roles that we can expect him to play in this Jaguars offense, because I know that a lot of people are kind of worried about, okay, how is he going to fit in with DJ Chark and Marvin Jones and, these 2 running backs with Etienne and James Robinson. Where is Laviska actually going to be working in this offense? And from what I can understand, he's going to be their main slot option. He's going to be the one, kind of commanding the middle of the field. Anytime they're running all this glance RPO stuff, it'll most likely be for Laviska Shenault, especially because of how good he is after the catch. You can really convert on those glance routes and make them not just a 10-yard gain, but maybe like a 14 to 16-yard gain, which really does add up over time. I wouldn't be surprised that if they start seeing single high press man coverage to stop those RPOs, or at least mitigate those RPOs, if they then start, throwing him those slot fades against single high looks, because he is a bigger than average slot receiver. And at least against most nickel corners, he's going to have a size advantage and probably be pretty effective on those play calls as well. And don't get me started again on all the jet sweep stuff he can do. He's a really good return man, so maybe you'll get like a random punt or kick return touchdown out of him this year. He's just a very high upside weapon that can do a little bit of everything. He's not a one-dimensional receiver. And even though he's, not as good of a deep threat down the boundary as, say, a DJ Chark or a Marvin Jones, I do think that he is going to end up getting more volume in this offense, because they are going to heavily lean on the quick passing game and all these kind of misdirection runs. And if I was a betting man, which I am, I actually think that among all these wide receivers, Laviska is going to lead them in total touches, and probably lead them by a pretty significant margin. Right now, I have Shenault listed as an 8th round value in my own rankings, my PPR rankings, and Underdog, at least in most Underdog drafts that I've seen, he's going somewhere on the 8th or 9th round as well. So I personally would not be surprised if he moves way up in these rankings by the end of preseason, and if he's going way earlier than that on Underdog by the end of preseason. Again, watch all these Jaguars preseason games. They're really, really important. It's going to be a fascinating offense to watch. And there's a lot of talent there, so just kind of keep an eye on them. And that brings us to number 4 on this list, which is somebody who I think actually is making technically his 2nd consecutive appearance in this kind of all undervalued list for the year. I believe I briefly mentioned him last year, but didn't technically put him in. But I do feel like he does deserve his own spot this year, and that is Raiders receiver Bryan Edwards. I have long been of the opinion, pretty much ever since Edwards was drafted alongside Henry Ruggs, that Edwards is a better fit for what Carr likes in an outside receiver. And this is nothing against Ruggs, by the way. There are certain offenses where I think that Ruggs would absolutely thrive and he would kill it and he would be one of the more dangerous threats in the entire league. But I just feel like Carr favors big body guys that jump really high, that are really aggressive at the point of the catch, that are great route runners, that are really tough over the middle. This is not me taking a shot at Ruggs at all. Ruggs is fantastic. I loved him as a prospect. I had him in my first round for a reason. He is as dynamic as it gets. But again, in terms of volume, in terms of fit with a quarterback, in terms of, how the Raiders offense is designed, I really do think that Edwards is going to be the young Raiders receiver to own, at least in PPR formats. Derek Carr is not a bad quarterback at all. In fact, I'd venture to say that he's a good one, but I do notice that throughout his career, he's really tended to favor guys with catch radius and physicality that he just kind of has a bigger margin for error with in terms of being able to throw up 50-50 balls and have them pay off. I think that's part of the reason why he loves Darren Waller so much. Not just that Waller can separate like crazy for a tight end, but just that he has a great catch radius. And again, he kind of gives Derek that extra little bump in trust that, hey, if I'm going to throw this ball high in the seam, he can go get it and he can make my aggression pay off as a quarterback. And at least Bryan Edwards, I think with his size and his build and his physicality and his leaping ability, it's probably one of the more tailor-made receivers for Derek Carr's play style that he's really had in his entire career as a Raider. And the craziest part about it is that nobody's really talking about him. He's going as the 67th wide receiver off the board on Underdog right now. His overall ADP is like 141 or 142, which is insane. That means he's going, mid-teens in terms of rounds. He's going really, really late. Like, you're going to be able to get this guy for dirt cheap, and all it takes is just one good game in the red zone and like 6 catches, and all of a sudden he's putting up 25 points and probably carrying me to a win. So I'm just really, really high on what Bryan Edwards brings to this offense, and you are going to get him dirt cheap. You're going to get him in like the 14th or 15th round and just laugh your way to the bank. And now, ladies and gentlemen, is the moment that you've all been waiting for, the number one undervalued receiver on this list. Before I get to him, though, I do want to give some honorable mentions. Of course, with Elijah Moore and Terrace Marshall. It took a lot for me to not put them on this list, but I felt like I've been talking about them all offseason, and I didn't want to make yet another video about how much I love Elijah Moore and Terrace Marshall. So just kind of pencil them in as like number 6 and number 7 here. I very easily could have thrown them in, but just go watch my Dynasty Rookies episode. Go watch like my favorite picks of the draft episode. I've been talking about them for months. So I wanted to kind of shine the light with my number 1 selection here on another rookie receiver that is similarly talented to Elijah Moore and Terrace Marshall, but is getting very little publicity in comparison, and that is Cardinals rookie Rondell Moore. I don't really know why this is, but I'm seeing virtually no hype, at least from national media, about Rondell Moore compared to basically every other highly drafted rookie receiver. I'm seeing Elijah Moore updates hit my phone every 5 minutes, and deservedly so. He's amazing. I've seen a whole bunch of updates about Terrace Marshall and Jalen Waddle and Rashad Bateman, all these guys. And of course, Jamar Chase is going to be looked at really intensely in Cincinnati as well. But I'm not really seeing any hype pop up for Rondell Moore at all, even though he's doing the exact same thing that all of those other rookies are doing in practice. At least in the local media reports coming out of Arizona, Rondell is cooking everybody that goes against him. His route running is fantastic. Obviously, he's explosive as hell. Like a legit 42-plus inch vert, and that shows up on tape. His start-stop is just tremendous. His deep speed is amazing. His ball skills, again, for a guy that you don't really think of as a contested catcher because he's only 5'7", his ball skills through contact are just fantastic. If he was 3 inches taller, he would have been an easy top 15 pick. The only reason why I think he was, again, kind of forgotten about among all of these great rookie receivers coming out this year is because at Purdue, his quarterback situation was horrible. I mean, they did not have anybody that could get him the ball deep down the field, so they were resorting to giving him just a bunch of screens and slants and all these jet sweeps and stuff, just anything to get the ball in his hand, because they couldn't reliably get it to him more than 10 yards down the field. Their quarterback situation was that bad. He got profiled as this guy that, he's more of a gadget player. He doesn't run a full route tree, but it's not that he couldn't run a full route tree. He's a really, really good route runner. It's just that they didn't have anybody that could actually throw him the ball accurately. So why bother running a corner post, 25 yards down the field when you have a quarterback that's going to miss him by 10 yards anyway? He was just really, really unlucky in terms of his situation in college. He's a much more talented player than the box score indicates. And at least now that he's in Arizona with a very, very talented quarterback in Kyler Murray that can throw him the ball deep down the field. And of course, I also think that he's going to get a lot of one-on-one opportunities to pay off those deep balls from Kyler Murray because, let's be honest, who's going to double him over doubling DeAndre Hopkins? I think he's going to get a ton of opportunities just from that alone. And when you look at how he fits into this receiving core, obviously you're going to have DeAndre Hopkins on the outside and then either AJ Green or Christian Kirk opposite of him. But in terms of who's going to be the primary slot weapon in this offense, I don't think that it's going to be Christian Kirk. I think that it's going to be Rondell Moore. If anything, Kirk is going to be fighting for snaps with Green and not with Rondell because Rondell is just a more dynamic player. You can do more things with him. I know that this receiver room, at least on paper, is really kind of hard to project. It's very crowded. It's kind of a murky situation to figure out for a lot of fantasy players. But again, just trust my golden rule and bet on the talent over the situation. Bet on how dynamic Rondell Moore is. Bet on how explosive he is. And bet on the fact that coaches are very predictable. Their job security relies on putting their best players on the field so that they can win as many games as possible. And since I think that Rondell is their best receiver after DeAndre Hopkins, he's probably going to end up getting a lot of snaps. So just trust in that because in the end, if you're going to gamble on something, at least gamble on talent. And with that, that'll wrap up my 5 undervalued receivers for the 2021 fantasy season. Again, these are not everybody that I could have put on this list. It's a very long list of undervalued receivers, but these are just the 5 that kind of stuck out to me the most that I think that I'm probably going to end up drafting in virtually every single league. Again, if you want to check out Bestball fantasy formats and just kind of have a little bit more fun drafting, knowing that your team's not going to be ruined by an injury or just by guessing wrong, check out Underdog at the link in the description below. Use promo code Brett, and that will get you $25 free to use on the platform in any way you please. It's a really, really good format and also run by really good people. I genuinely enjoy working with them. They're one of my favorite sponsors. On top of that, if you want to get access to my fantasy rankings, you can hit my Patreon link, again, in the description below. They only cost $1 if that's what you want to pay. It's really up to you. But either way, you get access to those. I've got PPR format out already, and then I'm going to have standard scoring out later this week, so keep an eye out for that. And of course, you could just, leave comments on that Patreon thread and ask whatever questions you want to ask, and I will answer them. I'm going to meet you guys back here same time tomorrow when we're going to talk about undervalued running backs. It's something that I think you guys are going to really enjoy. It's a pretty good list. And I'll see you guys back here tomorrow. And until then, cheers.